We're in Lexington, South Carolina at Paradise Plants Plus, and I'm speaking with Dan Clayton, who grew all these magnificent camellias. Why or do camellias do so well in South Carolina?
I don't know, Amanda, but I'm glad they do. I really am. I think it's environment. I think it's, we do, if we want to know what the weather's going to be in South Carolina, it's constantly changing. I think camellias really like that. They like some cold, they like some warmth. I think they're well suited to the state and to the Southeast in general.
You know, what you said really just set off an idea, because people call us a lot and say, oh my goodness, it's going to be 20 degrees and I'm not going to have any camellia flowers. But
right.
Camellias are really kind of adapted to having some cold days and some warm days,
They really
aren't they?
have, and of course white ones, bruise a little bit easier, if there's some rain in the forecast or something like that. But if a camellia has a bud on it, it's going to continue to bloom. And, we always have really good blooms in South Carolina.
And an individual camellia can have several months, as long as the buds seem to develop over an extended period of time, don't they?
Yes, ma'am. We have varieties that grow, that'll start blooming in even early December, and will be blooming into March.
Gosh.
There's several different ones, and they're all different, of course, but they'll have different bloom cycles and different length of time that they, stay in a bloom mode.
I feel like the early botanists loved to come to South Carolina, and apparently developed close relationships with some of the early planters. And so we are so fortunate. We've got, down at the coast, we've got Middleton Gardens with their magnificent flowers and camellias, and then Magnolia Gardens. And I think you have developed a relationship with Magnolia Gardens because you seem to be interested in the older varieties.
I am. We primarily grow older ones, and I'd say 90% of what we grow is probably pre-1900. And there's a lot of research that goes into specific varieties that we want to grow, and the real reason for that is you've kind of got to find a niche.
And also, these plants seem to be pretty adaptable. They don't seem to be prone to the vapors, even though they're old.
Exactly, exactly. And that's a big thing. You want something, and all of the varieties that we grow are from this, not necessarily from this area, but they've been propagated here, and we, do a good job of leaving them in the environment that they need to be in.
You said you have some that you don't even know what they are, and you have to be like a detective.
I do, and that's part of the fun of it. When I got into this, I had a piece of property that I had access to, and where I got a lot of my initial cuttings from. I had no idea about what the varieties were or the stories behind these varieties. And so I started propagating the ones that were pretty. And some of the pretty ones, were ones that were, that were very rare, and some of them were just kind of run-of-the-mill. And so that's been a wonderful thing. And I do have several varieties that over the years I have collected from different pieces of property.
These plants originally came from Asia.
Yes, ma'am.
But they didn't come directly to the United States, did they?
No, I think all camellias originally came from Asia, in that area, China, Japan, and were sent through the East India Company several hundred years ago to Europe. And the United States started acquiring camellias, and they started to be sent from England, Kew Gardens and several other gardens in England, in Europe, about in the late 1700s.
We've got these old yards that you've been able to go to. You've been able to go to Magnolia.
Yes, ma'am.
And sometimes you don't know what they are. How do you find out what it is?
Well, there's a lot of research, and it's not just the bloom and what the color bloom is. It's a lot about the actual fingerprint of a camellia is the edge of the leaf, and how many serrations it has per centimeter and that kind of thing.
That differs from plant to plant?
It does.
Wow.
And so it gets very involved, and we want to make sure that the plants that we're growing and providing to folks are very specific to the variety that I'm telling them it is.
I bet there's some stories behind the names some of these plants have.
Well, Amanda, you're sitting right behind one of them. This is Professor Sargent, which was named by Mr. Drayton from Magnolia, who is the director of the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard University.
Wow.
And to this day, Tom Johnson, who is the director of Magnolia, and Kate White, who is the head horticulturist, have allowed me and are still allowing me to come down and do research and to take cuttings of these beautiful camellias, and so that we can grow them, so that they'll continue to be available.
I imagine that some properties like Historic Columbia and other places around the country that have connections with old times
ma'am.
and gardens want to have a source for these camellias.
They do. They typically want period pieces. So if a property was developed or built in 1825, 1840, whatever, era, they want something that was available during that period of time.
Do you take cuttings to start these?
Yes, ma'am. All these are started from cuttings. I'd love to say that we graft and we do air layering and that kind of thing, but we're doing things on such a scale that it's just unrealistic.
And how many varieties do you have?
I have about 100, right just under 100, and it's manageable. I think my wife Lee may disagree with that a little bit, but.
And you said that you have very few problems with pests and diseases, partially because you hand prune?
Yes, ma'am. I hand prune every plant, and it takes a while, and I've got some great folks that work with me, and they're very good at what they do, and they do help me a good bit. But we do hand prune every one of them.
What's the biggest misconception people have about camellias?
Amanda, probably that camellias are actually trees. I see a lot of things on making it grow, as a matter of fact. With folks calling in and saying, well, Amanda, my camellia bush has gotten too big, and how can I reduce the size of it and that kind of thing. Try to be careful on where you site some of these, and do a little bit of research into how big these plants are going to get. And if you put them in the right spot, you really enjoy it.
Well, I can certainly tell you that I've enjoyed being here today among these beautiful camellias, and I want to thank you for helping preserve what really is not just Asian history and European history, but certainly a major part of South Carolina history. If people want to know more about what you're doing here, is there a way to keep up with y'all?
Yes, ma'am. We're on Facebook. We have a Paradise Plants Plus Facebook page, and we put a lot of, the photographs of the blooms and different information about the different varieties.
Okay. Yeah. And sometimes you take these to shows and things, and people can see them there.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, thank you for letting us come today.
Well, thank you again.
All right.